to be joined tonight by Melanie Lawrence and Dr. Jered Weinstock, two outstanding role models within the CF community. Melanie is an adult living with CF and a passionate healthcare advocate. Dr. Weinstock is a pediatric pulmonologist in Anchorage, Alaska at the Providence, Alaska Medical Center. We are so very happy to have Melanie and Dr. Weinstock with us tonight. So thank you both for being with us here today. Without further ado, I would love to hand it over to Melanie, who will kick off the session. Melanie, the floor is yours.
Thank you so very much. And hello, everyone. I am so excited to be here. I have a particular fondness for speaking with students, and I love the curiosity and interest you bring to the table. So super happy to be here with you tonight. As Stephanie said, I am an adult living with cystic fibrosis. I am 43 years old and I live in Massachusetts. It's been a long time, but many moons ago, I graduated from Northeastern University studying nursing and psychology. And I just love to see all of the majors and interests in the chat box. So I'm so happy to meet you all. Just to tell you a little bit about myself, I am here because I work with the CF Foundation on many advocacy projects. I am passionate about making a difference and bringing more humanity to healthcare, for lack of a better description. And the CF Foundation is really great about listening to patients and giving them a seat at the table. So I will tell you a little bit about my life living with CF, but I won't bore you with all the details. I also do have a son who's 12 years old and the light of my life. He's amazing. So I was diagnosed at 5 years old. And when I was diagnosed at that time, my parents were told that the life expectancy was about 16 to 18 years old. I was aware of this as a child, and it definitely shaped how I grew up and how I viewed life and the world around me. But I tried to live as much of a normal life as I could as a kid. I was very energetic and athletic. I played a lot of sports, and I actually kept my cystic fibrosis a secret from my classmates. I would secretly go in for recess for chest physical therapy, where they would like beat on my chest and break up all the mucus. I would miss 2 weeks of school at a time to go into the hospital for IV antibiotics. But I would make up silly excuses, and no one was the wiser until senior year when I finally let the cat out of the bag. As a teenager, I began being passionate about clinical drug trials. I did a lot of them. I still do to this day. But clinical drug trials do come at a price, and they're not risk-free. There was one clinical trial I did when I was 18 that severely damaged my kidneys, and to this day, I have ringing in my ears all day, every day since I was 18 years old. So I say that just to share that clinical trials are a necessity for medical advancement. They're great. I still continue to do the research, but there is a patient risk involved, and it's not, I think that needs to be recognized from the research community and to be valued as we're on the same team, we're putting our bodies on the line, and we deserve that acknowledgement. Like I said, in school, I studied nursing and psychology. I didn't practice as a nurse because the germ risk was too much. I catch colds really easily, which can turn into infections, and I would need antibiotics for sometimes 5 weeks at a time, really having to pull back on living life and being an active participant. So I have to make very calculated risk-benefit analysis with everything I do. Instead, I started working in healthcare on the administrative side for a private practice. I fell in love with it. I love the opportunity to impact patient care and to improve it and to be creative about it. I had my son when I was 30, and all went well. He does not have CF, but I think he's a more empathetic human being for having a mom growing up with a chronic illness. I do have to spend hours a day on therapies to keep me healthy. I do respiratory therapy. I take nebulizers. I take a slew of pills and things like that. There is no cure for CF, as many of you know. But there are a lot of drugs that have been groundbreaking and made an improvement in our lives. So I I'm lucky to be on one of those. It has really changed my life in the way that I can live a somewhat normal life. I went from getting sick all of the time to getting sick minimally, but I still have my challenges and I still do need a lot of antibiotics. So part of my advocacy work came from the need for the gaps in healthcare. So I am resistant to almost all antibiotics. The bacteria in my lungs have outsmarted them. And so I am very passionate that we need new science and new research to find new antibiotics. And in that, I testified before a US Senate subcommittee a few weeks ago to talk about drug-resistant bacteria and the desperate need for new antibiotics. The science behind medical advances from when I was diagnosed at age 5 to now has happened at lightning speed. And it is so exciting to sort of be alive at this time because science is happening real time. And it's sort of a catch-up game where the patients are living with the medical advances, but we're still learning about them. It's still also very new. And so there's different interactions, drug interactions, there's different side effects. There are a lot of different comorbidities, like other things that are coming on as adults with CF are living longer. And not everybody has the answers. So that's sort of why we need all of you to come into the fold and help us solve some problems and think creatively and think outside of the box. Medical progress is happening at lightning speed, but there is no cure for CF. And I still, even though I'm on a lot of highly effective medications, I still have a lot of health issues that prevent me from living life to the fullest. So I love to see students so engaged and willing to join the medical field to make your own difference and, you know, bring your own perspective to the table. I think that why I'm so passionate about healthcare advocacy is because you clinicians and doctors and researchers and scientists, you have the book smarts, you have the education, you have the learned expertise, but you'll never know what it's like to live with whatever you're treating unless you've actually walked in those shoes. And so patients with the conditions that you're treating, me with cystic fibrosis, we're the ones living it every single day. And we're the ones who know what, like, who implement the treatment plans that we're given and know how well it works, how well it doesn't. So I think my favorite thing of all that I've learned in my advocacy work and working with clinicians is the idea of co-production. And that is where instead of doctors and providers talking at patients and looking at patients as textbook education, as an example, as a chart, you look at them as human beings, you connect with them on a human level first and foremost, and then you involve them in the process of deciding what treatments you're going to use. My doctors have been outstanding at Boston Children's Hospital about having conversations with me and getting my input in what my treatment and therapies are instead of just telling me what to do and saying, come back in a few months. And that is really invaluable in healthcare. I think that's what healthcare needs more of. I think that there's nothing small about small talk to connect as human beings one-on-one when you're talking, even in research, when patients are just quote unquote subjects and you're just sort of they're guinea pigs, for lack of a better word. They're still human beings and they're still putting their bodies and lives on the line. So having small talk with people and with colleagues and with clinicians is huge for help to improve healthcare and bring more humanity to it. That's what good quality healthcare looks like to me. First and foremost, and empathy. I think it's important for me as a patient to have empathy for what it's like to be a clinician, what it's like to take care of patients who will die, what it's like to have a job where you're constantly getting paged and texts and you're never really off the clock from like crises. So I think it's important for patients to have empathy for clinicians. It's important for clinicians to have empathy for patients and what their lived experience is. And it's important for you to have empathy for your colleagues and the other jobs that they will do. We all bring something to the table, and I think that deserves to be heard and valued. I think the biggest lesson I've taken away from my advocacy work by far is that each one of you, every one of us, can bring a great idea to the table that can spark innovation. But the real progress happens when people from all different sides of the table work together with a shared objective. I think it's important to not only learn the science behind CF or whatever disease you go on to work with, but to keep an open awareness about what it's like to live with that disease or that illness or that ailment. And to me, a leader, which all of you will be and are, is somebody who values everybody at the table with an open mind and a curiosity. And with that, I thank you for your time, and I'm going to pass the baton over to Dr. Weinstock.
Thanks so much, Melanie. That was a great talk, and it's so great to be here today. I thank the CF Foundation for inviting me to speak to all of you. Again, I'm Jered Weinstock. I am a pediatric pulmonologist here in Anchorage, Alaska, and I will be talking to you a little bit about myself and my role here at our center in Anchorage, Alaska, and then also again about some of the advancements and history of cystic fibrosis. So I'm going to share my screen because I do have some slides just to help guide the conversation. And I think we should be able to see them now. So again, I think we'll spend a few minutes because there's a lot to talk about here in a short amount of time, but a few minutes on exactly who I am, what is my role as a pediatric pulmonologist, and how I go about running our CF affiliate center here in Alaska. So in brief, because I could spend an entire session on my journey to become a pulmonologist or be in my position at this time, but just so you all know as young leaders, you know, what took me to get here. So I started my journey after high school, of course. In undergraduate, I was a biochemistry major. On the East Coast, I did most of my studies. I was born and raised in Pennsylvania. So did 4 years of biochemistry and then pursued a brief 1-year master's program in biomedical sciences in the Philadelphia area. And then subsequently went to medical school for 4 years. And during that time in medical school, particularly my last 2 years when I was in clinical rotation, that's when I became interested in the pediatric population. You know, you're exposed to all different types of medical fields and specialties within your clinical rotations of medical school the last 2 years. And this is the most important time for you to figure out, you know, where you see yourself going in terms of your future. So I decided on pediatrics simply because I had a great mentor. I had a great experience during my few weeks in that rotation, and then went on to complete a pediatric residency, which was a 3-year residency program in New Jersey, where I again came across a really good mentor who was a pediatric pulmonologist at the facility where I trained at in New Jersey. And I really just took a liking to a pediatric pulmonary in general. It really fit what I was looking for in terms of a nice mix of inpatient, outpatient exposure, as well as some procedures in the OR or endoscopy suite in terms of bronchoscopies, which are the main type of procedure I perform quite frequently. And then, of course, from there, when I made that decision to go into pediatric pulmonary, the last part of my training was a 3-year fellowship, which I completed at Children's National Hospital in Washington, D.C. And that's where I really became exposed to cystic fibrosis, being that the center I trained at in D.C. is a very big CF center. Well over 200 people are enrolled in that center, both pediatric and adult patients. And I really, really took a liking to the entire CF journey, learning what these patients face on a regular basis. And then again, even during those few years that I was in training in DC, so from 2018 to 2021, really seeing some of these great advancements, really what Melanie was referring to in terms of some of these newer treatments that have been on the market and have been really, really life-changing for a lot of people living with cystic fibrosis. But of course, we do not have a cure yet. There is still a lot left to be done. And this is what I really want to focus on today for the rest of my talk. So in brief, for those that are not as familiar with cystic fibrosis, just to quickly summarize, it is what is referred to as an autosomal recessive disease, meaning you need to have 2 mutations, meaning one from each parent typically, in order to have the actual disease known as cystic fibrosis. So it's a disease that's essentially affecting a protein known as CFTR that functions at the cellular level of the cell membrane to allow chloride to properly pass in a specific manner. And in cystic fibrosis, the CFTR protein is affected so that we have an issue with that chloride getting across this particular channel. And therefore, what happens is we have this increased mucus-like secretion, essentially all types of glands and structures that are supposed to have a properly functioning CFTR protein. So not only does cystic fibrosis affect the respiratory system, but it really does have a huge impact on other bodily systems as well, whether that be the gastrointestinal system, the skin, of course, the sinuses. A lot of different organ systems are involved aside from respiratory. And this really intrigued me in my training and my learning about cystic fibrosis, because you're really treating the entire person. I mean, not just focusing on the lungs and the respiratory health, but even the mental health component. And again, any of these other systems that are affected. So I am, again, the director of our Cystic Fibrosis Affiliate Center here in Alaska. And for all of your information, there are many cystic fibrosis accredited centers across the United States that regularly see cystic fibrosis patients, both in the pediatric setting and in the adult setting. Due to the nature of our center in Alaska here, we are certainly on the smaller side, but because we have limited numbers of specialists here, I see both pediatric and adult patients in our CF center. Remember, cystic fibrosis used to just be a disease that primarily affected the pediatric population, given the high mortality rate and the shortened life expectancy, into the teenage years and years ago. Now, just recently, it was announced that the average person with CF is now living well into their 50s. I even have some patients that are in their 60s and 70s right now at our clinic. So it just goes to show what some of these great advancements have done thus far. And again, really just opens the window and the hope that, we will continue on this incredible role. So aside from my role as a director here at our affiliate center, we also are an active research center here in Alaska, and we're part of what's known as the Therapeutics Development Network, or TDN. So we actively take part in certain research projects that are funded by this particular foundation and network, and we actively look into different treatments and different studies to essentially see what could be effective in the future and expand upon what we have already available right now. So it's a very, very fascinating time to be part of this field. And again, I am very, very hopeful for what is to come in the future. So again, like I mentioned, I treat personally people with CF ranging from newborns to adults. And as a pediatric pulmonologist, I have a really important role in the overall diagnosis or the diagnostic process for CF in general. I would say on average, nowadays, cystic fibrosis tends to be flagged or detected in the newborn stage because most of the newborn screens have the ability to flag a certain type of enzyme that's made by the pancreas. And if this tends to be abnormal, it is again a red flag that cystic fibrosis should be a consideration. Nowadays, too, some of the newborn screens, interestingly, are able to even reflex or perform some genetic screening on patients that potentially may have cystic fibrosis based on these newborn screen results, which has just been outstanding. So again, it just goes to show that a lot of progress, even in the diagnostic aspect of CF, has come a long way. So aside from the newborn screening part of diagnosis, the gold standard is a sweat chloride test. This is a test that anyone with suspicion for cystic fibrosis will have performed, whereby we are essentially getting somebody to sweat using a type of device that's attached to the skin, and we're measuring chloride levels and comparing them to the parameters from the center whereby they're getting this test done. And if this is a true test, a true positive test, there usually is a really, really high definitive possibility that this person has cystic fibrosis. And we then go on to then do some genetic testing and find out what the mutations are. Again, I could spend a lot of time in just the diagnosis process, but just so you all have an idea of the general gist of that, and what, again, my role is in the whole diagnostic process of cystic fibrosis, even here in Alaska. And again, what usually does occur in a lot of the other centers across the lower 48 in the United States. So again, I think it's also important to note that from the beginning, even in the newborn stage, my team, myself, all the other providers involved in cystic fibrosis care here, we build lifelong, impactful relationships with not only the patients, but also the families who are involved. We know that these patients and people will be following us very, very closely. Typically, every 3 months, we have people coming to see us for their quarterly appointments and making sure that everything is going as planned and making sure there are no issues. So you can imagine coming in at least 4 times a year, even when someone's doing well, we do build those really, really impactful relationships that are so, so important for cystic fibrosis overall. I'm not going to go through each of these, but I just wanted to highlight, where we've come in terms of the history of cystic fibrosis and sort of where we are today. So it was really first characterized back in 1938, followed by the development of the CF Foundation in the 1950s. The gene itself, the CFTR gene, was really not discovered until the late 1980s. So in 1989 is when they did some groundbreaking study there to really uncover what was behind the development of cystic fibrosis and what was really causing that from a physiological standpoint. And then you can see, following the discovery of that gene, some incredible developments occurred in terms of medication approvals, again, increase in research, antibiotic developments, and again, the era of what we know as the modulators. So the first one to really enter clinical trials was what's known as ivacaftor, or Kalydeco is the brand name. And this one first entered clinical trials in 2006 and was later approved several years later. What these modulators do, very interestingly, and again, this has been the new era of treatments, is essentially what we're doing is looking at that CFTR protein and trying to either increase the effectiveness of it, so potentiate its effectiveness, or correct it. So some of the mutations that are involved in cystic fibrosis cause that CFTR protein to be malformed. So the modulators, some of them have the ability to help correct that CFTR protein and put it into a correct form so that it functions appropriately. Now, the last modulator to be approved in 2019 is known as Trikafta. And this has been one of the biggest developments in cystic fibrosis, in that it is both a potentiator and corrector. So it has 3 different types of potentiate, well, a combination of potentiators and correctors, but 3 different ingredients essentially that comprise this particular therapy, and has been just a phenomenal addition to the treatment landscape in cystic fibrosis for those people that qualify for it. Which brings me to my next point, in that, yes, we have these modulator therapies available to help figure out how we can correct the CFTR protein, or again, increase its effectiveness, but there are very strict eligibility requirements. So if somebody doesn't meet the requirements based on their mutations, unfortunately, we have about 10 to 15% of the cystic fibrosis population that is ineligible for any modulator therapy. So again, the modulator therapies are not perfect. They have come a long way and are doing quite well, but there is still a lot of work, both for people that are on the modulators and again, for those that have not been eligible for any of them at all. So where are we right now? So again, I've been mentioning the CF Foundation. We know that this continues to be a relentless pursuit of a cure in terms of all of the research and all of the leaders involved here, really helping us to figure out what can be done to find that cure for cystic fibrosis. There are many, many dedicated scientists and clinicians from not just pulmonary, but other disciplines as well that have really helped us to better understand CF and also discover some of these new treatments and practices. You can see just as of a few years ago, I mean, there's been incredible amounts of funding into laboratory research. I mean, we're talking hundreds of millions of dollars here that have helped us to really develop drugs from a preclinical standpoint, as well as help deliver some of this highly specialized care and training for cystic fibrosis. And it's really been, more than any time in the history of the foundation. So it just continues to get better and better. This is just a quick graph here to show really the substantial development and amount of growth in terms of funding that's been dedicated over the years to not just the basic science research, but also drug discovery and overall care for cystic fibrosis. So really, really incredible to see. So again, we talk about this cure, but how do we get there and what does it involve? Well, we know that there are many routes that we could look at, but there's that one mission to really find that cure. So, we'll talk about some of these different routes briefly while I have some time, but just know that there are many unique challenges that each of these routes face. And the research itself really involves a lot of ambition among scientists and leaders, young leaders, including like yourselves, to really help understand the underlying cause of the disease and ultimately deliver a cure. So here are the big core strategies that I have listed here to really help us address the underlying cause of CF. So number one, we have to figure out how can we repair that broken CFTR protein? Number two, how can we restore that protein when none even exists? So it's important to remember that some people have severe mutations whereby they're not even able to produce the CFTR protein. Some of these mutations tend to be those that, again, they're able to produce the protein, but it is broken or it's malformed or it's just not working as efficiently. But imagine somebody who's not even making any of that protein. These are people with CF that we really struggle to treat because they are ineligible usually for a lot of these newer treatments that are available. And thirdly, one of the other strategies is to fix or replace that underlying genetic mutation to really essentially address the root cause of cystic fibrosis. So each of these approaches really does require a different set of tools and knowledge. We're going to zoom in on this quickly, but this is really a pathway of where we are and where we're headed. And I'm going to break this down on the next two slides in a more zoomed in fashion here. So if we look on the left, really what I was talking about earlier with that mutated CFTR gene, we need to figure out what to do with it. So we talked about repairing that protein, and what's the plan there? Well, we have the modulators that are available, but we have some, we definitely need more. And again, these modulators that are available are certainly not a treatment for everybody. Again, remember, we have some people that do not qualify for the modulators at all. If we look over here in the middle, at restoring the CFTR protein and then fixing or replacing the CFTR gene, now we're talking about the era where we're in right now. So developing some of these treatments that involve gene therapy, mRNA therapies, short nucleotide therapies, for instance, or even if we look on this next part of the graph here, using some type of modality to edit the CFTR gene and correct its malfunctioning, or to essentially transfer the gene. So we would really give the recipe and replace that malfunctioning CFTR protein or create the protein for somebody who's not even able to make it. So again, this is a roadmap, but it's very important to understand that it's very, very tricky in terms of finding the correct solution for this. Remember, in cystic fibrosis, we're dealing with this very, very thick mucus that we need to overcome in a lot of these therapies in order to effectively deliver them. So if we don't have a clean airway in general because of the underlying disease, we run into a lot of these barriers in terms of some of these newer treatments and finding a way to correctly deliver them. And from a gene therapy standpoint, again, we don't have anything available in this aspect right now, although there are currently projects in phase 1 trials even. But remember, this is a new beginning in terms of where we are for CF treatment. So genetic therapies really, I think, and I know the CF Foundation agrees, are really looking as a bright avenue, at least for the future in terms of treatment. So looking at the drug development pipeline, I'm going to go through this pretty quickly, but it's really just to show you what the CF Foundation, what we have accomplished in cystic fibrosis from a research perspective, and again, looking at some of these things that are in development. So these different types of modulators, again, are those types of therapies that we just talked about that are helping to restore the CFTR protein. So you can see here, there are 4, so the checkmark means these are now available to patients. There are 4 actively available modulators that are available to those patients who are eligible. But you can see here, even below, we have additional types of therapies to help restore CFTR function that are actively in clinical trials, even some that are in preclinical trials, but that are, again, hopeful for those who may not qualify for those therapies that are available now, or these may even be therapies that may even be better than what we have available. So again, very, very interesting and hopeful to see that, we have this ongoing research in this area. Along the lines of what I just was talking about, genetic therapies, look at the list here. I mean, again, you can see very, very early on still for the majority of these treatments, but, you have these first 4 in phase 1 trials. So, we're past the preclinical stages and actively recruiting patients for, most of, at least for some of these, they're inhaled genetic therapies. So we're not at the point yet where we're actively, delivering maybe like an IV infusion of the corrected gene, but starting with something like an inhaled genetic therapy to potentially see its impact on somebody's respiratory health and cystic fibrosis. So again, this is something brand new in the cystic fibrosis treatment landscape. And again, you can see here, just from a genetic therapy perspective, the list of different companies and active studies that are ongoing right now. This is really, really impressive and really important to acknowledge. So remember, mucus clearance is a very, very important hallmark of cystic fibrosis treatment, meaning we're just trying to break up that mucus in the airway and allow patients or people with cystic fibrosis to breathe more comfortably and hopefully prevent a lot of that mucus from sticking around in their airway. You can see the first 3 types of therapies are actively available now to patients. There are still some in clinical trials. But again, Pulmozyme goes back, almost pretty much 30 years now. One of the first active therapies that was indicated for cystic fibrosis to help people better break up some of that thick mucus that they deal with on a daily basis. So you can see, again, even from a mucociliary clearance perspective, some additional medications and therapies undergoing trials right now. We know inflammation can be a problem in cystic fibrosis in general. Ibuprofen was approved or indicated for cystic fibrosis, years and years ago. However, you could see there are some other therapies as well that are in clinical trials to really, again, focus on the inflammatory perspective of cystic fibrosis and help to decrease that in the future with some of these therapies. I talked about briefly during the history of CF, the development of some antibiotics, primarily inhaled antibiotics that have been very, very effective for the cystic fibrosis population, especially for those people who grow some of these more resistant or nastier types of organisms that we would prefer that they not colonize. But again, a lot of the available oral antibiotics and IV antibiotics tend to be resistant to some of these bugs. And some of the available inhaled antibiotics that you can see here have proven to be quite effective and at least keeping infection at bay or at a lower level, and helping patients cope with this on a daily basis. But look at the list here remaining under the checked ones here. I mean, you can see there's a laundry list of ongoing research into anti-infective agents, specifically dedicated to people with cystic fibrosis. So again, very nice to see these ongoing developments, and again, providing us that hope for future. From a nutritional aspect, there's always active research as well. A lot of patients with cystic fibrosis deal with what's known as pancreatic insufficiency. So the pancreas just is not working the way it should be because of that thick mucus and the dysfunction that has led to a decrease in the function of the pancreas in general. So people have problems digesting, fatty foods, fat-soluble vitamins, things of that nature, whereby they need on a daily basis and throughout the day enzyme replacement therapy. So there's always active research going on into expanding upon what we have available in terms of some of these therapies as well. So again, you see that there's been a huge amount of progress that's been made toward those goals. And we've met a lot of them, but again, there's still a lot that needs to come in the future, just based on that roadmap that we even saw a few slides ago. But I think, some of the tremendous progress should be noted just by the expanded approval of some of the modulators that were already available. So it's important to know that initially, when some of the modulators come to market, they're not available for all ages. Some of them may be available down to the age of 12, maybe slightly younger, but it does take additional research projects to really gain that increase in age eligibility. So we have a lot of these modulators that are now available, even to some infants as young as 4 months, which, I mean, this is incredible. I mean, starting somebody newly diagnosed with cystic fibrosis on a therapy that could help restore that CFTR function from the start and hopefully prevent any kind of worsening in the future, I think is just really remarkable. So again, that path to a cure, this is really a big, ambitious research initiative through the foundation to really help bring about these treatments for everyone with CF and ultimately deliver a cure. There's, again, a ton of financial allocation that's been dedicated towards this kind of research and continues to be, as you can see here, $500 million to this effort through 2025, which is just really outstanding. And again, the whole point of this research too is to just continue to really create this innovative research portfolio and to continue this collaboration with these top scientists around the world to really continue delivering that next generation of transformative breakthroughs in cystic fibrosis. So finally, my last slide, and then I guess we'll open it up to questions. Hopefully I'm doing okay on time, but again, what we're talking about here and what I'm just trying to really emphasize for all of you in terms of cystic fibrosis, where we stand and what we're looking to now in the future. We're looking here to, again, an even brighter future than what we're dealing with right now. We've come a long way, but even in just the last few years, I mean, yes, we've made these advancements over even, 30, 25 years, but, even over the last 5 to 10 years, a lot of stuff has really come to market here and has proven to be very beneficial for people living with cystic fibrosis. So again, the big Foundation Therapeutics Lab, they're based in Massachusetts. They are regularly conducting this groundbreaking research. They're a one-of-a-kind research facility, which is helping to really expedite a lot of these developments of both drug developments and other therapies to help, again, improve what we have available right now. And the big focus here is really on identifying some of these promising treatments for those, again, with some of the rarer and nonsense mutations that really, again, cannot be treated with what we have available right now. And again, looking to the future with these genetic therapies, or at least that concept moving forward. And again, I just want to end on this note that, as we all know, in the cystic fibrosis world, the fight really is continuing until CF stands for cure found. So that is all I have. I will stop sharing my screen, but thank you again to the Foundation for inviting me. And it's great again to be here.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dr. Weinstock and Melanie. That was amazing presentations on both of your part. I think, kind of like what Melanie was saying, it's really important to highlight the patient provider interaction, and really grateful that you guys could both contribute to that side tonight. So thank you so much. We're gonna go into some Q&A questions. So if anyone watching has any questions for either Dr. Weinstock or Melanie or both, feel free to type them in the Q&A or in the chat, and we will try to get through them. So the first question is there any cystic fibrosis foundation or government facility for the patients to cope with their mental health? I also want to know, what should the family or friends of the patient do when they're in their lowest condition?
Well, I can start. I can just comment on that. So a very good question. So in our cystic fibrosis center, and in all centers typically, it's multidisciplinary, meaning I am not the only person seeing the patient. So in a standard visit, we usually dedicate about an hour to every visit at least. People are seeing myself, they're seeing a nutritionist, they're seeing our social worker, who also helps patients cope with any kind of mental health problems or difficulties, and also helps to refer them to any maybe outside people that may be beneficial for the patient to have. So the help is there. And I know the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation really does support that. Because again, I mean, mental health is something that we really make a really important focus, at least in all of our visits with any of our patients, especially as they get into the teenage years and adulthood. We want to make sure that all of that is in place, and that people are okay. So we always make sure that those resources are available, and that they know who to turn to and who to contact. And again, I think it's really important to, over the years, develop these good relationships with the families and the patients, because you want them to feel comfortable and have that good rapport with you, so that, again, they know that they could turn to you if there's any kinds of issues, or open up if there are any other concerns. So I hope that answers the question. I don't know if Melanie has anything else to add on top of that, but that's, from my point of view, something that's very important that we hold in high regard, for sure.
I think you hit on a lot of great points, Dr. Weinstock. I would just add that a lot of the committee work that I do within the CF Foundation, they don't have an institution to go to, but like Dr. Weinstein said, every center has social workers and or psychologists on hand, but they are doing so much research on how to address mental health needs of the community better. They're constantly looking at what are our blind spots, what are we missing, what are the needs of the community, and then listening to community feedback, which is what I applaud about the CF Foundation, is it is all centered around patient perspectives and family perspectives. And they do have a Peer Connect website, where if someone is living with CF and has a particular issue that they're dealing with or needs mental health resources, they can go to the CFF website, and there's a Peer Connect where they can connect with somebody else who's dealt with the same issue. And as far as what you can do for someone who's having a hard time with any illness, is that a lot of times illness can be very isolating, especially in the CF community, because we physically can't be together. We only know each other through computer screens. And when you're not feeling well and you're not going out into the world as often to get that social interaction, I would say the best thing you could do is to be there for them, to normalize talking about the hard stuff, and to encourage them to get professional help.
Yeah, great answers by both of you. I really appreciate that, the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation has those resources for everyone within the community. And I think that, it's wonderful that we highlight that here. All right, so our next question is kind of more on the sciencey side of, is there a quadruple modulator in the works?
So I would say no right now. I don't see that in the development. What we do have, I think, that seems to be advancing nicely, is a very similar type of modulator to Trikafta. except there is one just different. It's a triple therapy, just one of the ingredients is different. And the difference there is, so Trikafta is twice a day right now, and this new one that seems to be, again, promising would be a once a day therapy. And again, it's too early to tell if it may have even additional benefits aside from just the better dosing. But time will tell. I mean, we'll see more of that as we have some of the larger studies, but it does seem to be moving in a positive direction. So as far as quadruple therapy, no, but there are, again, more advancements on expanding really on what we have available right now.
Awesome. Yeah. Okay. And then another question on modulators. Do the modulators only help with reducing mucus, or do they also help with lung function, like increased FEV1?
Good question. So the modulators, from at least from Trikafta standpoint, so again, the newest modulator on the market. So again, it's almost been about 4 years that since it was approved. This coming November, came out in around November 2019. So the studies right now, there are a few active studies looking at, well, okay, we have this new modulator. How are people doing on it now that, it's 4 years out almost? And what we know is that on average, FEV1 or lung function in general for most people has been increasing probably on the order, I would say average about 5%. Now, of course, that's average. For some people, maybe it's increasing a lot more, maybe it's increasing a little bit less, but it definitely does seem to have a positive effect on most people with lung function. I have a few people who are adults and were in lung transplant territory prior to getting on Trikafta. And once they started Trikafta, there was no more need for that transplant evaluation, which has just been incredible to see. Their lives have completely changed. It's not only affected lung health, but even growth and nutrition. We struggle sometimes with people to maintain good weight. Some people even need some type of supplemental way to give nutrition, something with like a G-tube it's called. So a device in the stomach whereby they need to give nutrition by that route because we just are struggling to gain appropriate weight. With Trikafta, we have seen improvements with nutrition, and some people that did have something like a G-tube in are essentially not even using it anymore. So it's not just lung health, but we have seen just pretty good advancements, I think, in other aspects as well. So again, that's what's really made it really be like a shining star for those that are eligible. Again, the hope is that we can expand upon that in the future so that even those that are not on any modulator, can have the same kind of experience moving forward.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much, Dr. Weinstock. Let's shift gears into clinical trials while we're talking about it. And Melanie, this question is for you. Can you talk more about your experiences in clinical trials?
I'm happy to. I'm always in one because I never say no. I just feel like I feel an obligation to help science move forward and not just benefit from everybody else's sacrifice. So that is why I am so invested in it and never say no to anything. I'm always in a clinical trial. I'm sometimes in several at once. I will try just about anything. And I am currently in the clinical trial that Dr. Weinstock was just talking about. And I think it's been it's exciting because you're part of this active science progression. It does come, not every trial goes to market or gets approved. Some of it doesn't have much of a benefit, and that's a bummer. And it does move very slow, but it is overall been such a good experience for me, and I'm happy to keep doing it.
That's great. I'm so glad to hear that you have opportunities like that to get involved too. And while we're talking about clinical trials, as a general question, Melanie or Dr. Weinstock, if you know the answer to this, what is the average timeline for therapies like Trikafta to go through the clinical trials and get approved to the public? Is it months or years? What are we looking at here?
Definitely on the order of years. There's a lot that goes into any kind of trial, especially when it relates to something like cystic fibrosis. But just in general, I mean, any drug kind of a trial. So even on some of those slides you saw in terms of the developments, you see there's preclinical stage, there's phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. Each of these stages requires recruitment of patients, and that takes time in and of itself. And then usually once we get to some of these later trials whereby we're really trying to get a good handle on just how efficient they are, and again, safety and all of that, they're usually at least a couple months long just for one particular phase of the trial. So when all that's said and done and everything's looking okay, then all of this has to be submitted to the FDA. And then that's a rigorous process in and of itself, just to, again, everything to be evaluated from a time standpoint. So we're definitely talking about certainly at least a year, certainly probably even longer.
Thank you so much for answering that. The next question is about rising prescription prices in general. Is this an issue that affects the CF community and the development and accessibility of treatments currently on the market?
Yes. I will say absolutely. And I think that when everyone thinks about getting involved in healthcare, I think one great need for more active participation and leaders to join, it would be institutional, like healthcare delivery and policy. So yes, Trikafta is amazing. And yes, the pharmaceutical company is developing a ton of modulators that have really changed the game. But these modulators are over $300,000 a year for one medication. And I know I have friends in the CF community that after insurance are still expected to come up with $10,000 a month. So I think it's one thing to innovate and develop drugs, but it's a whole other need for policy and change and affordability.
Yeah, I will add to that too. It is something that we deal with regularly. I mean, yes, there's a clear indication, for these modulators, for those that are eligible, but still, they are very, very expensive therapies. There are some support programs in place through the manufacturers that, tend to be very, very helpful for families. And I think, we're certainly very, very happy with that. But again, yeah, every now and then we certainly do run into some issues with obtaining it. And it's unfortunate from that aspect for sure.
Yes, definitely. I can totally understand how it must be incredibly frustrating, both from the patient perspective and the provider as well, to see some of those prices. So thank you both for weighing in on that question. So we're nearing the end of our session, and I want to end off on one really great question here. I'm so sorry if we didn't get to all of your questions. Please know you are always welcome to email us, and we'd be happy to get back to them later. Our last question here is, how has having cystic fibrosis or working with patients with cystic fibrosis changed your personal outlook on life? Are there matters that you approach or think about differently?
I love this question. May I go first?
Please, absolutely. This is all you, Melanie.
I love this question so much. Thank you. I forgot who asked it, but thank you for asking it. That was anonymous. It has undoubtedly changed my life in so many ways. And I have a younger sister with cystic fibrosis who also, it has changed her life, but in very different ways. And I think it's common to see both in the CF community. My younger sister has sort of had a very dire, I'm going to die anyway, so why bother living sort of mentality, and has become a severe alcoholic on top of having CF. The total flip side for myself is to use it as a catalyst for fully living and fully being present. And I think growing up I knew when I was young and diagnosed that I was not going to, I knew my life was expected to be short. And so I've viewed everything in my life through a mortality lens, which has made life so much richer, and it's made me appreciate things so much more. I tell people I love them, I leave nothing unsaid. I appreciate the present moment, and I try to find the lesson in everything. So it, for me, has been such a gift.
I think as a caregiver for CF, and again, seeing a wide range of different patients and ages and all of that, it really, I do my best with every encounter to really empathize and put myself, in how they're feeling and what they're expressing to me, because I think it's just so important it helps to develop that connection. Again, as Melanie stated earlier, it's, I'll never truly know, and because I don't have CF, I'm treating it, I'm helping patients along their journey, but as much as I can try to connect, I think that's so important for both myself and every member of our team, because I think it really does just help, I think, again, with that overall care and really showing, people that, we're here for you, we want you to, be comfortable with us and let us know anything that's bothering you or going on. And of course, for those doing well, I mean, continuing to see that, it's just so rewarding. So I think that's what makes it really just a pleasure for me to, be part of this team and be so actively involved in just the care and research aspect of it.
Yeah, great feedback and input from both of you. So thank you so much. And thank you both for your time tonight. We really appreciate it. It's been a wonderful presentation. I've certainly enjoyed it. Very inspiring to hear both about both of your stories and, how you make an impact in the CF community. So thank you 100 times over. Just before we close out into our networking opportunity, I want to remind you guys that our next session is next Tuesday at 7 p.m. EST. So please join us then. And we are happy to have more awesome CF Tomorrow's College Leaders Program content for you then. So please join us then. Also, please check in on our Slack channel. Feel free to tell us where you're from, where you're going to school, what you're studying. You're also welcome to share your LinkedIn on there and interact with everyone in this wonderful community. And we are going to segue now into our optional networking opportunity. I know Dr. Weinstock will stay on for, I think, around 10 or so minutes, and Melanie will be on for a little longer. So you're welcome to stay behind and ask some questions. And thank you all so much. And we hope you have a wonderful weekend and a great night. Bye.